Legend tells that somewhere in South America, there is a great city of gold, El Dorado. A fabulously rich and sophisticated kingdom that was once home to thousands of people living deep in the heart of the Amazon jungle.
This was a stone city with squares and grand plazas and wonderful buildings with columns and carvings and statues.
To most people, it was just a legend. But for British explorer, 57-year-old Percy Fawcett, it was real.
It wasn't that far-fetched to imagine that somewhere deep in Amazonia, there was a major civilization.
Convinced he knew the location of this lost world, he spent years searching for it.
He was someone prepared to put his life on the line, head off into the middle of nowhere, and do whatever it took to achieve his goal.
With his son Jack and his best friend Raleigh, Fawcett set out in 1925 to find it.
They were convinced that this was going to be a great success and that they were all going to be really rich.
30 days into their journey, Fawcett wrote to his wife, "You have no fear of any failure." Then all three vanished. This is the story behind Percy Fawcett's dream. And it seems that he may have been onto something. There really may have been a great civilization in the jungle, but its riches were not gold. The true secret of the real El Dorado was something with the amazing power to completely transform all our lives. In the spring of 1906, Percy Fawcett was summoned to a meeting at the Royal Geographical Society in London and was made an offer he couldn't refuse.
Fawcett, have a look at this.
The Bolivian government wanted someone to map its borders with Brazil, and 39-year-old Fawcett was perfect for the job. His family motto was "Difficulties be damned." All his life he excelled at everything he had ever done. He was a first-class cricketer, an officer in the Royal Artillery, and a former British Secret Service spy in Morocco. But critically, he was a highly trained mapmaker and geographical surveyor who had been taught how to fix his position anywhere in the world. Fawcett's mission would be to survey and map the western Bolivian borders with Peru and Brazil. And his exploration, he was told, would be difficult and dangerous. But to Fawcett, all this sounded like a dream job. The romantic history of the Spanish and Portuguese conquests of South America and the mystery of its jungles pulled him in. Now his heart was pounding, even though there were complications.
There were my wife and son to consider, and another child on the way. But destiny intended me to go, so there could be no other answer.
Fawcett's destiny had been sealed from a very early age.
I think he was about 6 or 7, and the family was living on the Devon coast. He discovered some Roman remains in a cave near where they were living, and they excited him enormously. It made him the center of attention, and it caught his imagination. And I think that it was that single incident that put the spark there. And for the rest of his life, he was searching for treasure.
It was this thirst for adventure that made the Amazon job so irresistible.
There is something about the Amazon. It's the greatest of all rainforests. It's something like 3,500 miles across. And I think it's that mystery that somehow got to Fawcett, drew him out there and away from all he'd loved into a place of danger.
From 1906 to 1911, Fawcett made several difficult surveying expeditions into the Amazon jungle.
Fawcett was a person who had really extraordinary field skills, and it's important to realize that the kinds of work that he did do was not easy at all.
Not only did Fawcett have to deal with the hostile environment,
Disease fevers of one kind or another were everywhere. People were going down within days of starting work in these areas.
But to make it worse, Fawcett was surveying in an area crawling with dangerous locals.
He was in one of the most contentious parts of the Amazon, in one of the most inflammatory periods in Amazonian history.
There were very hostile tribes in the very areas he was going through. There were roaming gangs, people who threatened your lives, people who were killing people. All of this would, to many people, have made the assignment sound terrible, but of course, to Fawcett, it was just like throwing coal on the fire. He loved it.
But as the years passed by, something else was beckoning him. Fawcett was becoming hooked on exploring the Amazon jungle.
Deep down inside of me, a tiny voice was calling. At first, scarcely audible, it persisted until I could no longer ignore it. Inexplicably, amazingly, I knew I loved that hell. Its fiendish grasp had captured me.
Fawcett realized that the surveying work was holding him back, and by 1911 he had had enough and resigned.
Fawcett once said that he much preferred the company of savages to civilized boors. I think that says a lot about the man, that he was someone who was a maverick, who was an outsider, who wanted freedom, who sort of embraced the wilds somehow.
Fawcett's heart was in exploration, but what he needed now was a mission grand enough to satisfy his passion.
When he first went out and was surveying, he heard stories of an advanced civilization in Brazil.
He was on to the gossip, these stories that twirled around and swirled around these areas.
He didn't reject them, he rather accepted them. And it was those stories that led him piecing them together like a jigsaw puzzle.
I had by this time heard in several places vague traditions about the remains of the ancient civilizations, and my imagination was stirred by them to such an extent that the urge to investigate was becoming more and more insistent.
We knew that there were incredible civilizations in the highlands and in Mexico, so why would there not be, in the heart of Amazonia, some extraordinary civilization that people just hadn't gotten around to finding?
Then in the same year Fawcett stopped surveying, the ancient Inca ruins of Machu Picchu were discovered in the Peruvian Andes by the US. It was the most important find in South America since the days of the Spanish conquest. This really fired Fawcett's belief. He became certain that there had to be something even more fabulous out there.
Machu Picchu's romantic discovery was recent news, but my objective dated much earlier than the Incas, and I felt it was to be sought farther east, in the wilds still unknown. All the great Indian tribes had traditions of a once great civilization to the east.
He was in an area which was at the confluence not just of the Inca civilizations, but also the confluence of Bolivian civilizations and these upper Amazonian civilizations. And those areas were talked about with a great deal of interest in the early exploration in the 1500s.
One story that obsessed Fawcett was the historical account of the Spanish conquistadors' Amazon expedition in 1541.
Fawcett was very familiar with the literature of the Amazon, and he must have been hugely struck by the earliest accounts from the 16th century. People like Francisco de Orellana, who was the man who first descended the Amazon and discovered it for Europe.
For 8 months, Orellana and his 57 conquistadors traveled downriver towards the sea searching for El Dorado, a kingdom of gold described by various Indian tribes as being a city deep inside the jungle.
And eventually, as they went down, they met large groups of people in villages. They went as far as finding roads heading to the interior. They heard that there were towns in the interior.
Oriana tells us that there were highly populated riverbanks, and we're talking about communities perhaps of 20,000 strong. So this must have played on Fawcett's mind.
They recorded a different set of groups and different groups of people. Some were dressed, some were not. And they noted that they were in very large quantities.
Could this be what Fawcett was looking for? If so, where was this city? Fawcett then came across another intriguing record, housed in Rio's National Archives Library in Brazil.
One of the documents that we know particularly fascinated Fawcett was document 512.
This decaying historical account was known simply by the catalogue number 512 because it had no author. The name of the person who discovered the city had worn away, so Fawcett called him Francisco Raposo. Raposo was a Portuguese soldier of fortune who described how, after a long, troublesome journey incited by the insatiable greed of gold, he and his men came across a mountain path that had been cut by man rather than by nature. And when they reached the top, they saw a spellbinding vista, a huge deserted city. The man Fawcett dubbed Raposo had written,
"We went on into the strange city, and we came on a road of great length and a well-set-out plaza, and in the middle of the plaza, a column of black stone of extraordinary grandeur. We went with fear and trembling into some of the houses, and in none did we find vestiges of furniture or movable objects by which or whose use we might guess at the sort of people who had dwelt therein."
The city was deserted, but within it they found all manner of fantastic things, these large halls and columned buildings and broad boulevards, just like something you might find in ancient Greece, or imagine you'd find in ancient Greece, sitting there right in the middle of the jungle at a fork in the river.
We marveled that this place had been abandoned by those who had formerly inhabited it, for with all our careful investigations and great diligence, we had met no person in this wilderness who might tell us of this deplorable marvel of an abandoned city whose ruins, statues, and grandeur attested its former populousness, wealth, and its flourishing in the centuries past.
Fawcett was fascinated. Raposo had come across this vast, lost city.
I've looked at it myself, and it conjures up images of a lost world, a sort of city of gold.
Although there was no mention in the document of the city's location, Fawcett now had further evidence of the existence of an ancient civilization deep inside the Amazon jungle. And he was also convinced that this was the same city that Oriana had seen 200 years earlier.
It was exactly what he was looking for. It was proof positive. This wasn't his imagination. This wasn't something he'd made up or that was just the myth story of native peoples. Here we had it in black and white.
Had Oriana and Raposo seen the lost city of El Dorado? Fawcett himself would never call it El Dorado. "I call it Zed for the sake of convenience," he wrote. Even though Fawcett had never seen this lost city, he was happy to describe what it would look like to his younger son, Brian.
The central place I call Zed, our main objective, is in a valley surmounted by lofty mountains. The valley is about 10 miles wide, and the city is on an eminence in the middle of it, approached by a barreled roadway of stone. I expect the ruins to be monolithic in character, more ancient than the oldest Egyptian discoveries. Judging by inscriptions found in many parts of Brazil, the inhabitants used an alphabetical writing allied to many ancient European and Asian scripts.
We don't really know an exact moment when Zed came into his mind. He had always believed that there were certain places in the world that were home to advanced civilizations.
Fawcett was also convinced of something else. He believed that the people who lived in these remote, hidden places possessed extraordinary abilities. In this, he had been influenced by his peculiar upbringing.
Fawcett had a very unusual background as an explorer. He wasn't someone whose father was someone who wanted to get to the South Pole or North Pole. Nothing obvious about him at all. Rather the opposite. He was from a strange background, you could say.
His aristocratic father spent the family's wealth and died of drink at the age of 45. And so it was to his mother the young Percy turned for inspiration.
His mother was very interested in spiritualism and had a very great influence on Fawcett, and it lasted all his life.
Fawcett's wife, Nina, was also interested in seances and astrology, and his elder brother, Edward, was a member of the Theosophy movement, a philosophical school formed by Helena Petrova Blavatsky to obtain hidden wisdom and enlightenment.
He was influenced particularly in the religious area. Among other things, Percy at one point went out to India to be with Helena Blavatsky.
Blavatsky's many followers included Gandhi, Thomas Edison, and Sir Arthur Conan Doyle. All this greatly inspired Fawcett's beliefs, especially Blavatsky's conviction that there were master priests capable of producing psychic messages to save mankind, and they lived in remote cities in such places as Tibet and South America. By September 1914, Fawcett was getting closer to locating his lost city of Zed, in his mind, a vast spiritual civilization. But before he could go, the First World War broke out. Fawcett found himself in the thick of it on the Western Front.
He fought some of the major battles and was very active, was mentioned in dispatches, was promoted in the field to colonel. I think that for several days he was actually a general.
By the end of the war, Fawcett had received 2 medals, the Distinguished Service Medal for Bravery and a gold medal from the Royal Geographical Society for his historic mapping of South America. But his obsession hadn't left him. On his return to England, Fawcett was more determined than ever to make his path to Zed, as he called it, a reality. Fawcett told his young son, Brian,
The answer to the enigma of ancient South America, and perhaps of the prehistoric world, may be found when those old cities are located and opened up to scientific research. That the cities exist, I know.
Gradually, piece by piece, clue by clue, Fawcett zeroed in on where Zed had to be. Influences from his past, especially his mother and Helena Blavatsky. Conversations with tribal peoples. Archival records from Francisco de Orellana's 1541 expedition of seeing communities 20,000 strong. And Raposo's account of a spellbinding vista of a huge deserted city eventually pointed Fawcett to just one place. His lost city of Zed lay alongside the Xingu River in an area of southwestern Brazil called the Mato Grosso. All he needed was the money to get there. But Fawcett was facing severe setbacks. Britain was exhausted after the war and experiencing a severe economic collapse.
To return again would take every penny I could find. I came out of the war convinced that as a world power, Britain was on the wane. Many thousands must have come through those 4 years of mud and blood with the same disillusionment.
Raising money for another Amazon expedition proved almost impossible.
His hopes were dashed very quickly. He had hoped that the Royal Geographical Society would provide the funds. He found that there wasn't money to come.
Money wasn't the only thing Fawcett had to contend with. Fawcett's professional colleagues began to question the importance and validity of his quest for a lost city called Zed.
People were beginning to say, just a minute, you know. Some of these stories this fellow are telling are nonsense. This can't be right. It doesn't make sense. Do we really want to finance this stuff?
Many felt that the lost city of Zed could not exist for environmental reasons. They argued that the soil of the Amazon was simply not productive enough to support a large society. Seething with frustration, Fawcett wrote,
I cannot induce scientific men to accept the supposition that there are traces of an old civilization in the Amazon.
But eventually help did come. Although the Royal Geographical Society couldn't pay for Fawcett's next expedition, they did support his application with the Brazilian government to secure some money. In 1920, Fawcett was back in the Amazon, searching for his El Dorado, the lost city of Zed, with 2 male companions. But the expedition didn't go smoothly. Rains flooded their route and destroyed their equipment. Four weeks into their journey, their animals started to die. A starving dog had to be shot, and Fawcett killed one of their horses to put it out of its misery. The place became known as Dead Horse Camp. Then one of Fawcett's companions suffered a mental breakdown, and the other ran off to Rio to get married. Undeterred, Fawcett carried on alone.
He really was obsessed with finding this city. People were falling sick all around him, but somehow it didn't seem to affect him. He could go on and on and on.
All explorers are driven people. You've got to be driven. You've got to be someone who is able to hang on to your vision, whatever you come across. And yet, this is a man apart. I mean, he really was a fanatic.
Always driven by the hope of finding Zed, the hope that it was over the next hill, that there would be a new scrap of information that would lead him there.
Loneliness is not intolerable when enthusiasm for a quest fills the mind. The chief disadvantage seemed to be that were I to find anything of scientific or archaeological value, there would be no witnesses to support my word.
Soon, finding Zed became the least of Fawcett's worries.
The rainforest looks incredibly abundant. It looks like the perfect place to survive in. But the soils are thin. A lot of that food is right up in the tree canopy. Up there, the monkeys. Your greatest danger is starvation.
Starvation sounds almost unbelievable in forest country, and yet it is only too likely to happen.
And after 3 months alone in the jungle, exhausted, without food, and close to death, Fawcett abandoned his expedition. Back home in Devon, He would spend the next 2 years kicking his heels with frustration.
The last few years have been the most wretched and disillusioning of my life, full of anxieties. My wife and children have been sacrificed for it.
I think that his wife and children missed him enormously. Nina particularly was very sad and lonely with his long, long absences, and the children doted on him.
Of our 24 years of married life, only 10 have been spent together. Apart from 4 years in the Great War, I have spent 10 in the forest.
You have to feel for his wife, poor old Nina. Whenever he was back in Devon, he felt he wanted to exchange that love and that comfort that she could provide for the danger, for the mystery of the Amazon.
Who will ever understand that I want no glory from it, no money for myself, that I am doing it unpaid in the hope that its ultimate benefit to mankind will justify the years spent in the quest?
In desperation, Fawcett went to New York to find backers for his next expedition.
These kinds of expeditions were quite costly. So he had to be able to self-promote and to make this seem as the most important imaginable expedition out there at the time so that he could attract the funds, attract the attention.
And Fawcett did attract some attention. His promotional speeches convinced scientific institutions like the Museum of the American Indian and the American Geographical Society to support his journey with $1,000 each. But it wasn't nearly enough.
He gave a series of lectures, he went around to see big business. Fawcett was not a man to bring doubt into his conversation. He spoke very forcefully.
But he still couldn't raise the money and was forced to come up with a new plan.
Fawcett was quite a bit of a self-promoter. He constructed things as what we might call a kind of reality show, in which he would then be able to catapult himself into an icon of exploration.
Fawcett approached the National American Newspaper Alliance, whose members had a paper in almost every city in the country, with a novel idea. He would send runners back out of the jungle with minute-by-minute dispatches of their quest to find the lost city of Zed, so his readers would be able to follow and experience their journey as it happened. Captivated by his idea, the newspapers gave Fawcett a very lucrative deal. Similar deals were made with newspapers around the world, ensuring millions of readers. But most of the money would only be paid to Fawcett on the completion of their journey.
In some ways, I am rather glad that not one of the three of us makes a red cent unless the journey is successful, for nobody can say we were after the money in undertaking this rather perilous quest.
In 1924, Fawcett was back in Britain. As news of the planned expedition grew in excitement and support, the Royal Geographical Society agreed to pay for their equipment. Eventually, Fawcett managed to raise around $5,000, the very bare minimum, Fawcett believed, to get them through to Zed.
I found enough to make it imperative to go again. With the right companions, the right organization, and knowledge of the right way to go in, it can be brought to a successful conclusion. And our story, when we return from the next expedition, may thrill the world.
But Fawcett was reluctant to give too much away to the press before they left.
I cannot say all I know, or even be precise as to the locality, for these things leak out, and there can be nothing so bitter to the pioneer as to find the crown of his work anticipated.
A traveller is someone who wanders along, perhaps just for the sheer hell of it, but an explorer has a dream, has a vision, and is determined not just to pull off that vision, but to bring back information, bring back evidence of whatever it is he or she's found.
After his disastrous last expedition, Fawcett carefully picked his travel companions this time. His son Jack, now 21, and as strong as a horse and as keen as mustard, wanted to go with him. With Jack was his lifelong friend, Raleigh Rimmel.
Fawcett knew what he was up against. He was hardened. He'd seen firsthand the forest. He'd lived there. But that wasn't the case for his two companions. Raleigh Rimmel in his 20s, his son Jack, again in his 20s, totally fresh, totally naive.
Fawcett warned them both of the risks.
It would be one of the most difficult and dangerous expeditions in the history of exploration, the ultimate test of faith, courage, and determination.
So here was a man who understood the importance of precision, and yet here also was a mystic, a man who was prepared to set off with two inexperienced companions into the blue, into a mapless state, and wander around somehow until he found his lost city.
He told his wife, he said, look, we're going to be away a long time. It could be a year. Don't be frightened. Don't expect to hear from us. We're going to go forward. We're going to find Zed. We're going to have this enormous success.
In January 1925, Fawcett, Jack and Raleigh sailed from New York to Brazil, watched by the world's press.
It was a world-renowned expedition, and it was being followed very closely. By this time, they had been interviewed by all of the major newspapers. People were really excited that they were going off to find a lost civilization, and they believed they were going to do it. And so there was indeed a huge send-off. He was a major celebrity. Front page news.
The following month, they left Rio de Janeiro on their 1,000-mile journey by train and boat into the interior of Brazil. Their destination? The Mato Grosso's capital, Cuiabá. Fawcett called it their stepping-off point. On April the 20th, 1925, Fawcett, Jack and Raleigh put on their explorers' outfits and Stetson hats, grabbed their 30 caliber rifles and 18-inch machetes, and left for the jungle. Opinion was divided as to whether their expedition was sheer lunacy or not.
It's a little bit like Fitzcarraldo, where everyone thinks, oh, what a nut, getting a ship over a mountain and putting it on another tributary. But people were doing that all the time. So even though we might think it's the sign of total madness, in fact, at the time, it was a reasonable conjecture and a bold thing to try.
Their direction was towards the Mato Grosso's upper Xingu River system, a tributary of the Amazon where Fawcett believed the city of Zed would be.
The Mato Grosso is thick forest. Mato Grosso, that's what it means. And it is a devil of a place. That's the sort of phrase he would have used. A thick, nasty place. We're used to seeing a horizon. We're used to heading towards something. But in the forest, you see tree after tree after tree, and no more so than in the Mato Grosso.
Sticking to the deal made with the press, Fawcett used runners to keep the public informed of their progress.
As they went on each step of the journey, Fawcett would write a report, what they had seen, what they had experienced, and this chap would run back to civilization with it. They appeared in the American press, in the British press, in the Australian press, in quite a number of continental European papers.
Jack told his mother of meeting stark naked Indians, of never feeling so well on his 22nd birthday, and that it would take a couple of months to reach Zed, possibly on his daddy's 58th birthday. In fact, things were now becoming difficult for the explorers. In Fawcett's private letters to Nina, another story emerged. Along with descriptions of the difficulties of traveling, he revealed how Raleigh's foot had been poisoned by the insects.
I suspect constitutional weakness, and I fear that we shall be handicapped by him,
he wrote.
There was Raleigh's foot. It was painful. It was slowing them down.
Fawcett warned him that there would be no way out if it got any worse, but Raleigh refused to go back.
Raleigh felt that he'd come all this way. They were so close to the great treasure. He wasn't going to drop out at this stage, no matter what.
They were also approaching an area where there were tribes known to be aggressive.
It was Fawcett's hope that he would be able, as he had in the past, to make friends quickly, to gain their confidence, and in fact, more than their confidence, to gain their generosity because they needed their food.
It is obviously dangerous to penetrate large hordes of Indians traditionally hostile, but I believe in our mission and its purpose. I believe our little party of 3 white men will make friends with them all.
On the 29th of May 1925, 39 days into their journey, they reached Dead Horse Camp, where Fawcett had passed through on his last expedition.
Fawcett sat alone. We know this because Jack also wrote and said that his father had sat alone and wrote to his beloved Nina back in Devon.
The attempt to write is fraught with much difficulty. Here we are at Dead Horse Camp, the spot where my horse died in 1920. Only his white bones remain. Jack is well and fit. Raleigh I am anxious about. He still has one leg in a bandage, but won't go back. So far we have plenty of food, but I am not sure how long this will last. It is very cold at night and fresh in the morning, but the insects and heat are out in full force come midday, and from then until evening, it is sheer misery in camp. I cannot hope to stand up on this journey better than Jack or Raleigh. My extra years tell, though I do my best to make up for it with enthusiasm. But I had to do this.
Despite all this, Fawcett remained upbeat and ended his letter with,
"You need have no fear of any failure."
The next day, Fawcett gave the guide Nina's letter and waved him goodbye. These were the last words to his wife. With just Jack and Raleigh as company, he headed out into uncharted territory. All over the world, people waited for news, wondering where they were. But there was nothing but silence.
And the tensions on the home front, of course, were just awful. Nina had this great faith in him. She did believe that all was well.
Even 2 years after Fawcett had vanished, Nina believed he was coming back.
Any day now may bring a cable from my husband announcing that he is safe and is returning with Jack and Raleigh.
To read her correspondence is heartbreaking. 10 years after he disappeared, she still believed that he would turn up any day, that he was still alive, probably at that point that he was living in Zed.
But the news she longed for never came. And despite the many search parties sent out to try and find them over the years, their bodies have never been found. 25 years later, in 1955, the New York Times declared that Fawcett's disappearance had set off more searches than those launched through the centuries to find the fabulous El Dorado. Were they killed by Indians, as most believe, or did they die of hunger, or was it something else?
I don't think he was killed by hostile Indians. I don't think he was bitten by a snake. I don't think he was swept away by floodwater. I don't think he's still living out there and immortal in some Shangri-La, some city of gold. I think one or other of them stumbled, fell, couldn't keep on going any longer because of disease. And then the others had a choice. Do we stay with this dying man, our companion, or do we head off and go for help? Well, there's no help available out there, and I'm afraid they probably all died together.
But no one really knows. They had vanished without trace. Did Percy Fawcett and his companions die in vain? Were all those doubters right? There was no great civilization in the jungle called El Dorado. Had he simply been deluded? In recent years, scientists have made a series of extraordinary discoveries. In the same area where Francisco de Orellana and his 57 conquistadors saw cities of 20,000 people in 1541, and just 100 miles west of Fawcett's last search for Zed, compelling evidence of past civilizations is now being unearthed.
He basically traversed one of the areas in which some of the most exciting discoveries in the Amazon basin are taking place.
Hidden in the jungle for several hundred years and only emerging now as trees are felled to create farmland is evidence of a vast network of ancient sites. These sites, seen from the air, show an extraordinary crisscrossed landscape with straight lines cutting across the savanna. Amongst the open plains, there are also thousands of isolated mounds or islands of rich forest linked by giant causeways. Recently, it was discovered in these forest islands there are clear signs of past human habitation. Fragments of food remains, pottery, cooking urns, and human bones are now being uncovered on a massive scale. Here was evidence of a huge civilization. Archaeologists believe these sites and forest areas are part of an ancient civilization state that stretches over 160 square miles and was once home to hundreds of thousands of people.
It's important to remember that these cities were as large as Constantinople in the 1500s, or as large as London, which was one of the largest cities of the time. These great civilizations were complex. We know that they had complex religions, they had complex technologies, they were the great engineering societies of the time.
Could these be the remains of the great cities Francisco de Orellana and Raposo had described all those years ago? The ones that inspired Fawcett's quest to find his lost city of Zed? If so, why had they been swallowed up by the jungle? The answer is almost certain, that the people met the fate of all the other Indians who were killed by disease brought in by European explorers. With contact from the Spanish in the 16th century, swiftly over 95% of their population was wiped out, and their homes and cities disappeared with them. But how did these great civilizations exist at all if the most modern agricultural techniques can't seem to make the jungle productive today? How did these large communities of the past manage to do it? The answer may be in the discovery of the mounds of black earth, or terra preta, as the Brazilians call it. It is dotted over many areas of the Amazon jungle. When scientists analyzed this terra preta, they discovered that it contained a mixture of common Amazon yellow soil and organic waste. This meant that it was man-made.
What we understand from ethnographic and archaeological evidence is that these soils formed as a result of very simple activities of burning litter, rubbish, the relocating of bits of soil into other places, and discard of charcoal from pottery production, fish bone, and all the rest.
The extraordinary thing about this black soil is how productive it is. It produces incredibly high yields.
If communities, rather than just plant and harvest the yields that would come out of very poor soils, were able to modify soils, then larger populations could be had, larger villages could be had, and hence larger societies could be had.
It does seem incredible that where we now can't do anything with the soil, this ancient civilization had brought about an agricultural miracle.
Existence of these large populations was predicated on the use of terra preta. It increases productivity in the same way that irrigation increases productivity in dry lands, or terraces increase productivity on mountainous lands.
Terra preta is so remarkable that scientists are now working out how to reproduce it so it can be used all over the world.
I think that what we're going to see is that it's going to play a major role in enhancing the productivity of small and medium-scale agriculture, and also to provide livelihoods and sustenance for rural populations in much of the world.
So Percy Fawcett was onto something. There really was a society out there that may well have had a great treasure to share with us. But it wasn't gold. As he himself had once written,
The answer to the enigma of ancient South America, and perhaps of the prehistoric world, may be found when those old cities are located and opened up to scientific research. That the cities exist, I know.
History tells that in the 16th century, the great Inca Empire fled from the ferocious onslaught of Spanish conquistadors. Somewhere deep inside the jungles of Peru, the Incas built a last stronghold. There, they made their final stand against their ruthless enemy. But with their death, the memory of where this last refuge was disappeared. But one man was determined to find it. An American explorer named Hiram Bingham.
He was Indiana Jones. He was 6'4", he looked like a Hollywood idol. He was a man obsessed with this mission.
Bingham was a tough explorer. No Andean mountain seems to have been too high for him, no jungle too dense.
And he did find an extraordinary Inca city. Machu Picchu. It was hailed as the lost city in the clouds, a spiritual Inca refuge perching high on top of a skyscraping mountain. Bingham was convinced he had found the long-lost city of the Incas, their final refuge from the Spanish conquest. But all was not as it seemed. In 1911, there was a young scholar specializing in modern Latin American history at Yale University, USA, Hiram Bingham. But he was no impoverished academic. Bingham was 36 years old, married to Alfreda Mitchell, an heiress to the Tiffany Diamond Empire. They had 6 young sons and lived in a 30-roomed mansion on top of a hill. He was a man who seemed to have all the comforts of life. But Bingham was restless and driven.
Hiram Bingham had a really compulsive need to become famous, and I think that's because of his family.
He was Hiram Bingham III, and I think that's incredibly important because his grandfather, Hiram Bingham I, he was a very powerful, impressive missionary character, and so was his father, Hiram Bingham II. So there's this legacy, this weight on his shoulders that he had to prove himself or do something with his life at the very least.
What that something could be, he had absolutely no idea. To secure a permanent position at Yale University, Bingham went to Peru in 1909 to study the Spanish trade routes between Buenos Aires and Lima. During the journey, he was invited by his guide to see an ancient Inca site high up in the Andes Mountains. It was an event that would change his life.
It was my first introduction to prehistoric American history. I agreed, not knowing that it was going to lead me into a fascinating field.
Bingham is taken to this remote Inca ruin called Choqquequirao, which means cradle of gold, and is immediately struck by the romance of the position.
The Inca ruins lay 10,000 feet above sea level, and the climb was astounding, with breathtaking views of the distant snow-capped mountains and the roar of the Apurimac River below. It was also exhilarating.
At times, the trail was so steep that it was easier to go on all fours than to attempt to walk erect. Most of the time, we were hanging on to the side of the mountain almost by our eyelids.
On the way up, they saw amazing sights, including a huge condor that sailed down to take a look at them.
We could not only see his cruel beak and great talons, but even the whites of his eyes. It was an awe-inspiring moment.
Bingham was a tough explorer. No Andean mountain seems to have been too high for him, no jungle too dense.
Eventually, they reached the Inca ruins on the flattened peak. For Bingham, it was a magical experience. Choqquequirao was built in the 15th century and was believed to be a sacred Inca dwelling and one of their frontier fortresses. It was designed to defend the approaches to their great capital city, Cusco. Bingham wrote to his wife, Alfreda, to tell her it was the most interesting place he had ever seen.
He's amazingly impressed by the remains of Inca architecture because he'd never known about this before. He'd heard of the Incas, but he didn't know that what they'd achieved was quite as impressive as this. Some people see this as sort of epiphany, you know, this really changes the direction of his life.
Till now, Bingham's knowledge of South American history was limited to the Spanish colonial days, and he knew very little about the Incas. As he looked out to the distant mountains, Bingham was keen to find out more about them. Who were these people who built this extraordinary place? What was their story?
Those snow-capped peaks in an unknown and unexplored part of Peru fascinated me greatly. They tempted me to go see what lay beyond.
And he thought of this line from Kipling.
Something hidden. Go and find it. Go and look behind the ranges.
You get this feeling that this worked on him, on his imagination, that somewhere just beyond the range was a city, a world, a reputation to be found.
Back in the Yale Library, Bingham began researching the Inca history. He opened the pages of the Spanish Chronicles, a key source on Spain's golden age of discovery, conquest, and colonization of the Americas.
He began reading more about the Incas, and of course, even as a non-academic, the story of the conquistadors and the Incas is incredibly exciting.
Bingham learned how from the early 13th century to the middle to late 16th century, the Incas were the most powerful empire in the Americas. Their domain stretched over 2,000 miles, from modern-day Chile to the Amazon. But then came catastrophe. In 1532, the Spanish conquistadors, headed by their ruthless leader, Francisco Pizarro, entered the Inca heartland. He was hell-bent on their destruction. Over the next 40 years, the Spaniards drove the Indians from their cities and slaughtered them in their thousands.
Bingham really is intrigued by the history of the last Incas and what they'd done after the Spaniards arrived.
Bingham's eyes were drawn to an account where a young Inca emperor named Manco had led his people as they fled their capital city, Cusco, in 1536. Manco managed to escape the Spanish and created a new Inca capital called Vitcos, 10,000 feet above sea level, somewhere in the remote mountainous region of the Vilcabamba Valley. But the Spanish conquistadors were in hot pursuit, and the Incas fled again. This time, the chronicles said, they went down from their mountain homes into the Amazon lowland. There, protected by a dense jungle in the largest rainforest in the world, they built a new city called Vilcabamba. And it was here that the Incas made their last stand. But it was all to no avail. In 1572, the Spaniards finally defeated the Incas. And so with their death, their last refuge, Vilcabamba, disappeared from history. Bingham was transfixed by the story of Vilcabamba. But for all the references of the city, there was one vital clue missing.
Nobody, as far as he could see, knew where it was. This appealed to Bingham as a puzzle he could solve himself.
Bingham tried to work out where Vilcabamba could be. The Spanish chronicles said it lay 30 miles and 2 long days' journey from Vitcos. But he had no idea even where Vitcos was. Continuing his studies, he found another clue. The Chronicle said that Vitcos was 100 miles northwest of Cusco, along the Urubamba Valley in the Andes mountain range. Bingham knew where Cusco was. He had visited it on his last trip to South America. But if no one knew where Vitcos was, how would he know when he'd reached it? There was a further clue in the Spanish accounts. They said that there was a sacred area with a large white rock close by the city. So if Bingham could locate the white rock, he would know he had found Vitcos. Now Bingham realized that if he could find Vitcos, then 2 days beyond it, he should be able to find Vilcabamba. This, Bingham thought, would be how he could make his name. He would lead an expedition to find the Incas' last refuge, Vilcabamba. Bingham began to form his team.
He needed to be funded to take an expedition down there, particularly then. It was an expensive business.
The first thing Bingham did was approach a number of corporations. Businesses specializing in America's outdoor country pursuits offered their support. Abercrombie & Fitch supplied Bingham with an explorer's outfit.
He managed to get Winchester to give him a rifle, Kodak to give a camera, and then he turned to his classmates.
Bingham estimated that he would need 6 expedition members, and that each one would require $1,800 to cover their travel and food expenses. One former classmate heard about his plans and offered him $1,800 if he would take a Yale geologist with him. Bingham snapped up the offer. Others came forward. One was a topographer, another a mountain climbing engineer. Eventually, Bingham got together a multidisciplinary team.
So he's got a doctor, a naturalist, geologist, a couple of topographers. So it's a pretty good, well-rounded, versatile team.
To pay his own way, Bingham promised to write 4 articles for the fashionable Harper's magazine, but he was still $1,800 short. Only now did he turn to the one source he could rely on, his wife Alfreda, to tap the Tiffany fortune. She agreed. Bingham's party left New York for Peru on the 8th of June, 1911. Their destination, the former Inca capital city, Cusco. This, Bingham knew, lay near the Urubamba Valley in the Andes mountain range and would be his starting off point. Bingham's expedition arrived in Cusco on the 2nd of July, 1911. His aim was to first locate the sacred white rock at Vitcos, then to make his way down from the mountains into the lowland Amazon jungle to search for Vilcabamba. Bingham and his best friend, a naturalist named Harry Foote, set out on the morning of the 19th of July 1911 on their quest for where they believed Vilcabamba could be. The rest of the party were dispatched to carry out geological and mapping surveys of the Andes.
So they head off across the high-altitude lands, then descend into the Urubamba Valley itself. And the Urubamba is the famous sacred valley of the Incas, and follow the river along, sort of heading generally in the direction northwest.
Bingham kept a meticulous diary of his expedition. Today, it is regarded as one of the greatest first-hand accounts in the history of exploration.
I had entered the marvelous canyon of the Urubamba. Here the river runs through gigantic mountains of granite. I know of nowhere in the world that can compare with it.
Bingham writes in the most compulsive way. He's someone with academic authority, and yet he knows how to tell a good story.
Not only does it have great snow peaks looming above the clouds more than 2 miles overhead, it also has, in striking contrast, orchids and tree ferns, and the mysterious witchery of the jungle.
He paints pictures with words, and not just of visual things, but of the heart, you know, the spirit, what you're feeling.
One is drawn irresistibly onward by ever-recurring surprises, through a deep and winding gorge, turning and twisting past overhanging cliffs of incredible height.
He's still got a little way to go before he gets to this area where he thinks he's going to find Vilcabamba, the old Inca capital. So he's sort of working himself in, working the team in.
On the evening of the 23rd of July 1911, after a 70-mile journey from Cusco, and 3/4 of the way to where Vilcabamba is said to be, Bingham and Foote set up camp for the night in a canyon surrounded by steep mountains.
They camp at a place called Mandor Pampa, and they meet a man there called Melchor Arteaga. And he questions him, he says, you know, are there ruins around here?
Arteaga told Bingham there were some fine ones on top of the opposite mountain called Huayna Picchu, and also on a ridge called Machu Picchu, or Old Peak.
People in Peru were always telling him that if he gave them a bit of money, they could lead him to a ruin. And there was a little bit of sort of won't get fooled again feeling in his team.
They had heard ruins were around many times, and they'd gone, it would be one little house or a couple of things.
And this is where I think we have to give a lot of credit to Bingham, because lesser men would have said, oh, for God's sake, you know, there's not supposed to be anything up that hill. There's nothing in the history books. This is just a wild goose chase.
Bingham noted the ruins' names in his pocket diary and arranged for Arteaga to take him there the following day. The morning of the 24th of July, 1911, dawned with a cold rain. Bingham prepared for his climb up Machu Picchu. His best friend, Harry Foote, didn't fancy the wet conditions.
The naturalist said there were more butterflies near the river. Anyway, it was my job to investigate. Arteaga shivered. He said it was too hard to climb for such a wet day. But when he found out that I was willing to pay him 3 or 4 times the ordinary daily wage, he finally agreed to go.
Arteaga and Bingham left the camp at 10 a.m.
After a walk of about 3/4 of an hour, Arteaga left the main road and plunged down through the bank of the river. Here there was a primitive bridge which crossed the roaring rapids. It was obvious that no one could live for an instant in the icy cold rapids, but would immediately be dashed to pieces against the rocks.
He said, I admit freely, I was on my hands and knees going really, really slowly across, and all I could think of was, I hope the water doesn't go up because it'll just take the bridge away.
After the river came the mountain.
Leaving the stream, we now struggled up the bank through dense jungle. And in a few minutes, reached the bottom of a very precipitous slope. For an hour and 20 minutes, we had a hard climb. A good part of the distance, we went on all fours, sometimes holding on by our fingernails.
Bingham was now climbing at nearly 8,000 feet.
Bingham was going up through very difficult cloud forest. Conditions were humid, it was hard work.
Shortly after noon, just as we were completely exhausted, we reached several good-natured Indians who were pleasantly surprised by our unexpected arrival. It seemed that these Indians had chosen this eagle's nest for their home.
A small boy named Pablo Richate was sent on to guide Bingham around the ruins.
He's led by this little boy around a corner, and he sees something quite extraordinary.
Hardly had we left and rounded the promontory, then we were confronted with an unexpected sight. A great flight of beautifully constructed stone-faced terraces, perhaps 100 of them, each hundreds of feet long and 10 feet high. They had recently been rescued from the jungle by the Indians.
It is an amazingly evocative description of firstly going through what were lovely Inca terraces, Bingham says, and then slowly things build.
From the cleared stonework, he was introduced to another spectacular sight.
Suddenly, without warning, under a huge overhanging ledge, the boy showed me a cave beautifully lined with the finest cut stone.
And then he's going from one wonder to another.
It had evidently been a royal mausoleum. On top of this particular ledge was a semicircular building whose outer wall, gently sloping and slightly curved, bore a striking resemblance to the famous Temple of the Sun in Cusco. Clearly, it was the work of a master artist.
Then there's the temple with the rounded wall, and then cumulatively, the overall effect.
Bingham was stunned by its magnificence and realized that this wasn't just some little Inca settlement he has come to see.
It seemed like an unbelievable dream. Dimly, I began to realize that this wall and its adjoining semicircular temple over the cave were as fine as the finest stonework in the world. It fairly took my breath away. What could this place be? Why had no one given us any idea of it? Surprise followed surprise in bewildering succession. Suddenly we found ourselves standing in front of the ruins of two of the finest and most interesting structures in ancient America.
There are cyclopean stones, as he calls them. Stones the height of a human, but beautifully worked with very, very fine granite.
On the east side of the plaza was another amazing structure, the ruins of a temple containing 3 great windows, looking out over the canyon to the rising sun. Like its neighbor, it is unique among Inca ruins.
Bingham had made an extraordinary discovery. It seemed almost too good to be true.
Would anyone believe what I had found? Fortunately, in this land where accuracy in reporting what one has seen is not a prevailing characteristic of travelers, I had a good camera, and the sun was shining.
I know that he had a very special Kodak camera that was made for traveling in rugged territory, and the negatives are huge. So the resolution, you know, the detail is really fantastic.
But one question puzzled Bingham. Where was he?
Now, Bingham was not really looking for a ruin in this part of the world, so he couldn't make sense of what he'd found.
Machu Picchu laid 70 miles from Cusco, so it couldn't be Vitcos, which was said to be 100 miles from Cusco. And it couldn't be the Incas' last refuge, Vilcabamba, because that was said to be 30 miles on from Vitcos, down on the jungle plains. So what was this astonishing place? Suddenly, Bingham's eye focused on some charcoaled graffiti on a rock of the 3-windowed temple. Lizarraga, 1902. His blood ran cold.
Bingham was a man who wanted to make a name for himself, and he was pulled up short. He suddenly saw this graffiti. Had some scholar got there first?
Bingham wrote the name Lizarraga 1902 in his diary and prayed it wasn't another explorer.
Maybe he'd been picked to the post. Maybe this wasn't really a discovery at all.
Deeply worried, Bingham made his way back down the mountain. He hardly mentioned the Machu Picchu ruins, when he returned to the campsite below. In fact, his best friend, Harry Foote, wrote in his diary, no special things to note. Bingham discreetly asked Arteaga about the Lizarraga 1902 graffiti. Arteaga told Bingham, Augustin Lizarraga is the discoverer of Machu Picchu. He lives at San Miguel Bridge, just downstream of your campsite.
And at that point, Hiram Bingham must have sighed and thought, oh, that is that. And he actually writes it in his diary. Lizarraga is the discoverer. And his heart must have sunk.
Bingham was horrified and set off to find the mysterious Lizarraga. But when he got to San Miguel Bridge, Augustin Lizarraga was not at home. So Bingham spoke to his brother, Angel. Angel told him that the ruins were known in the valley and parts of it were cultivated by farmers. His brother was one of those farmers. Bingham relaxed. Lizarraga wasn't a rival academic after all. He was just a local Peruvian peasant. Bingham's discovery of Machu Picchu was secure. The very next day, he set off on another long journey to search for the last refuge of the Incas, Vilcabamba. But first, he had to locate the White Rock at Vitcos. Bingham followed the information detailed in the Spanish chronicles he had read back at Yale. He asked every local they passed if they knew the whereabouts of any ruins in the area, and paid local guides to lead him onwards.
He carries on down the valley into even more uncharted territory. He's put the whole thing of Machu Picchu to one side.
"15 days after encountering the ruins of Machu Picchu, Bingham came across the sacred White Rock, mentioned in the chronicles as being close to the Incas' capital city, Vitcos.
It was late on the afternoon of August 9th, 1911, when I first saw this remarkable shrine. We could now be fairly sure that we had located one of Manco's capitals, Vitcos.
If Bingham had found the ruins of the former Inca city, Vitcos, it meant that he had to be on the right track and close to completing his objective, finding their last refuge, Vilcabamba. The Chronicles said it was a long 2-day journey from Vitcos.
By now, Bingham's blood is up. I mean, he realized that these ruins are toppling over like 9 pins. You know, he's found Machu Picchu, he's found Vitcos, and there's one final place he wants to find, which is a place where the Inca emperor and the exiles escaped to if the Spanish ever came looking for them.
Bingham came down from the mountains into the huge lowland jungles of the Amazon. This was now a very different world to the ethereal mountaintops of Machu Picchu. It was a place that even the local Peruvians feared, like the Spanish conquistadors before them.
One of our informants said the Inca city was called Espiritu Pampa, or the Plain of the Ghosts, to be reached only by a hard trail passable for barefooted savages, but scarcely available for us, unless we chose to go on our hands and knees.
Finally, after several days traveling, Bingham found, beneath the thick twines of a rainforest jungle, evidence of some ruins. To his excitement, the locals called it Espiritu Pampa. Even better, they also called it Vilcabamba. Surely, Bingham had found the last refuge of the Incas. But as he set to work, he came across something very puzzling. The few buildings he had found were clearly Inca, but their stonework was rough and inferior. Bingham searched for more extensive ruins, but failed to find anything substantial. Bingham wrote in his diary,
After several days digging, ruins well scattered, long hard job to clear ruins, hardly worthwhile.
The more Bingham dug, the more he became convinced that the site just wasn't special enough to be Vilcabamba. But if this wasn't the place where the Incas had their last refuge, then where was it? Slowly, Bingham started to reconsider the evidence. He went back to the Spanish chronicles. They told him that Vilcabamba was the largest city in the province. Machu Picchu was clearly much bigger than anything he had found in the jungle. Then there was the puzzling issue of the inferior architecture. Nothing he saw in the Amazon matched the finely cut stone at Machu Picchu. Bingham also wondered about something else. Would the Incas, who are highland people, have really made a home down in the flatland jungle?
It does not seem reasonable that such people would have cared to live in the hot valley of Espiritu Pampa. These Inca ruins are unique in lying so low in the Amazon jungle. The difference in climate is as great as that between Scotland and Egypt. Furthermore, they could have found the seclusion and safety which they craved just as well in several other parts of the province, particularly at Machu Picchu.
Now he began focusing on another issue. The chronicles stated that the city of Vilcabamba lay 2 days' march from Vitkos. So did Machu Picchu, albeit in a different direction.
Machu Picchu was roughly 2 days from Vitkos if you walked across, and he did it. He walked from Vitkos across back to Machu Picchu directly.
An idea slowly began to dawn on him. Could his discovery, Machu Picchu, be the real Vilcabamba? Bingham returned to America at the end of 1911, determined to prove his case.
After Bingham discovered Machu Picchu in 1911, there was very little publicity. Tiny mentions in the New York Times and in the Geographical magazine in London, but nothing much.
Bingham revisited Machu Picchu in 1912, increasingly convinced it was Vilcabamba, the last refuge of the Incas. He was now head of a major excavation and clearing program, funded by Yale and the National Geographic Society. Looking over the tangled city, Bingham wrote in his diary,
Machu Picchu ruins as fine as ever. Very impressive.
The material Bingham produced was so impressive that the National Geographic devoted an entire issue of their magazine to his discovery.
The owner of National Geographic magazine said, we're going to make Machu Picchu a star, and moreover, Mr. Bingham, we're going to make you a star as well.
In April 1913, with the cover title, In the Wonderland of Peru, National Geographic published in pictures and text Bingham's amazing account of his finding of Machu Picchu. The news was a global sensation. The public needed little convincing. Finally, it became accepted that Machu Picchu was Vilcabamba, the Incas' final refuge. And Hiram Bingham's name was made. Hiram Bingham would go down in history as one of the all-time great explorers. But there is an irony in this tale. Machu Picchu was an amazing Inca site. However, modern scholars now believe that the ruins at Espiritu Pampa, which Bingham had dismissed in 1911, are far grander and larger than he had realized.
In 1964, some 50 years after Bingham had been there, an American called Gene Savoy, an adventurer and archaeologist, went down to Espiritu Pampa and did a much more thorough clearing of the site, and established really beyond doubt that that was indeed the proper last refuge of the Incas, which I think all archaeologists would agree today.
Bingham's initial detective work that had led him to Espiritu Pampa had been on the right trail after all. He had found the real Vilcabamba. He just hadn't realized it. So if Machu Picchu wasn't the last refuge of the Incas, what was it? Today, Machu Picchu is believed to have been built by the Incas during the expansion of their empire in the mid-15th century, 75 years before the Spanish arrived. It was constructed as a royal estate and served as a sacred and seasonal retreat for the Inca rulers whenever the weather was severe in their capital city, Cusco.
Everyone now tends to the view that it was built as a winter palace for an Inca emperor, probably the greatest of them all, Pachacuti. He could come down with his retinue to Machu Picchu, which has a much better climate, and enjoy a fabulous resort-type atmosphere. It was a very exclusive place, which is perhaps why there was no historical record of it. It was a place where an emperor could build his own fantasy creation in the clouds, a sort of Las Vegas, if you like, which, if it didn't have neon billboards, did have this show-off architecture that only an emperor could afford.
Scholars now believe Machu Picchu was abandoned by the Incas long before the Spanish arrived in Peru in 1532. Why they left their great winter retreat, however, remains a mystery. So where does that leave Hiram Bingham today? Was he just an adventurer who allowed his prejudice and emotions to get the better of him? Most would regard that as too harsh. To many explorers, he remains a hero.
Hiram Bingham was the perfect man of the moment. Here was a character with a dream, someone who wished to find treasure, and that is exactly what he did.
He made the discovery both of Machu Picchu and of other very important Inca sites. I think in many ways he is a bit of a hero, and rather more of a hero perhaps than Indiana Jones, because he's real.
He was the first scientific discoverer, the man who took the time, brought money to the enterprise, who exposed Machu Picchu to the world, literally peeling back that forest and showing us what an extraordinary place it was.
I was so happy that he had had the energy and the curiosity and the drive to find Machu Picchu, to rediscover it, to write about it, to make it famous to the whole world so other people could come and really enjoy it.
Despite being wrong about Vilcabamba and Machu Picchu, Hiram Bingham is still regarded as one of the greatest explorers of his age. After all, perhaps, he found one of the great wonders of the modern world.
The sanctuary was lost for centuries because this ridge is in the most inaccessible corner of the most inaccessible section of the Central Andes. No part of the highlands of Peru is better defended by natural bulwarks. A stupendous canyon whose rock is granite and whose precipices are frequently 1,000 feet sheer. Yet here, in a remote part of the canyon, on a narrow ridge flanked by tremendous precipices, a highly civilized people, artistic, inventive, well-organized, and capable of sustained endeavor at some time in the distant past, built themselves a sanctuary for the worship of the sun.
Eagle Warriors, elite shock troops of the all-conquering Aztec Empire.
This is a society of warriors.
Armed with shock weapons. Captives die on the sacred altar.
They would literally pluck out your still pulsating heart.
Now they face a new kind of enemy from Spain.
They had never seen iron weapons. They had never seen horses.
Two cultures that must clash.
There are no rules. It's kill or be killed.
It ends in a bloody battle that will become known as the Night of Tears.
People trampling over other people.
They're running for their lives.
For the Eagle Warriors, it is their finest hour.
This is certainly their largest military victory.
The mighty Aztec Empire is at its zenith. They came from the north. In less than 200 years, they ruthlessly conquer a wide swathe of Central America.
The Aztecs have to be absolutely ruthless, and they have to use violence in ways which intimidate local societies.
One by one, they knock out every nation that stands in their way.
The Aztecs were great warriors who were very good at battle.
An unflinching race, mobilized on a permanent war footing.
It's not numbers with the Aztecs, it's skill, ferocity, aggression.
Aztecs are literally born to fight.
From the time a male baby is born, he is personified as a warrior. He's given tiny weapons, little shield and bow and arrows. The midwife talks about it all as if he's going to grow up to be a warrior.
After the birth, a seasoned warrior takes away the baby's severed umbilical cord. He then buries it on a blood-soaked battlefield.
And this was a symbol of hope that the young boy would then aspire to and become a great warrior in his own right.
Military training starts early. From infancy, boys are enrolled at the House of the Youth.
Aztec education was tough.
Their whole point is to be better at this business than everybody else. That's it, that's all you do, military training. From the beginning to the end, it's a complete military monastic life.
Battle-hardened veterans are assigned to the novices. Their job? To turn boys into killing machines.
You take away that sense of individuality, you take away the sense of fear.
You would expect beatings or deprival of food.
You spend a lot of time drilling these people into automata, so that when they get to battle, they're not thinking, is this the right thing to do? There's the enemy, I hit him, that's my job.
The Aztec way of war is unique. They deploy their troops in a highly unusual way.
When the Aztecs went to war, they went to war to capture prisoners. The object is to hurt, maim, capture, but it's not to kill.
They didn't kill in battle. The idea was to capture a prisoner.
Being able to bring those captors back with you was a sign of great achievement.
The key is to break prisoners, but keep them alive. They are needed for a higher purpose. On the altar of the Great Pyramid towering over the Aztec capital, Tenochtitlan,
The captive would climb up the steps of the pyramid. He would be laid down across a sacrificial stone. His arms and legs held down by 4 priests so that he's stretched backwards and the chest is pulled outwards.
And a 5th priest would come down with a large flint knife and cut open your abdomen, reach inside and literally pluck out your still pulsating heart.
And the body would then be thrown down temple steps. And they would do this over and over again. It wasn't once, it was many, many times.
the ritual of human sacrifice terrifies other nations and intimidates them into submission.
The scale of human sacrifice is truly astounding. And it's much debated, but some people think that up to 50,000 people were sacrificed every year.
Carrying out over 130 sacrifices a day is killing on a truly industrial scale. But the Aztecs believe this mass slaughter is necessary. Their gods demand it.
The idea is that the gods let blood in order to create humanity, and therefore humanity must let blood to sustain the gods and to keep the sun moving through the sky.
Failure to feed the gods will have one certain outcome.
In the Aztec cosmology, if you don't continue regular and extensive human blood sacrifice, the sun won't come up, the crops won't grow, and we're all going to die.
Whether for spiritual or political reasons, the Aztecs believe human sacrifice is an existential necessity. It is so crucial that the empire develops a dedicated corps of special forces, trained to deliver captives, and lots of them. These men are called the Soldiers of the Sun. They are the Eagle Warriors. Eagle Warriors are the bravest and the best.
Warrior masculinity is central to Aztec identity. Men promote themselves, they promote their identity, they promote their importance through being warriors.
And as with today's special forces, entry into their ranks is highly selective.
A social and a military structure develops that privileges people who take a lot of captives.
This is how you earned your stripes, literally, and rose through the ranks of the military.
The more captives that they were brought to the capital, the more successful they were considered.
Today's modern armies all have their very own warrior elites. Units such as the Special Air Service, Navy SEALs, and Delta Force all train recruits not only to kill, but also to take the enemy alive. Ken Jones served with Great Britain's SAS, a body of men ruthlessly proficient in the art of taking captives.
Snatchers are an essential task in special forces units. I mean, the blood sacrifices have been placed now by intelligence gathering because of the essential need for governments to secure high-value targets and extract information from them.
And as it was for the Eagle Warriors, today's snatchers need a high degree of skill and courage.
To be involved in a snatch is just a short burst of intense aggression and fluidity. Within the first few seconds, you know that the target or targets are going to react because you're trying to assert control of a situation. If it drags on, then it's a bad job.
Eagle Warriors don't have the sophisticated weaponry available to today's special forces. But they are kitted out with a range of arms designed to not only kill, but also incapacitate, stun, and immobilize. These weapons all have one thing in common. They are tipped with razor-sharp volcanic glass, found in abundance throughout the Valley of Mexico. It's called obsidian.
Obsidian can be harder than steel and much stronger in compression, but it's very, very brittle. So obviously you can't make a long sword out of it. So the Aztecs use an ingenious solution. This is the Machu Picchu, which is the Aztec equivalent of a sword. It's basically shaped hardwood with channels cut into the side into which these sharp obsidian blades are fitted. This gives a razor-sharp cutting edge to a heavy club-like weapon. Struck on the skull, it would cut through flesh and muscle and sinew, smash the skull, destroy the brain. You'd be dead almost instantly.
But to deliver victims for sacrifice, Eagle Warriors need weapons that don't just kill.
The Aztecs are looking fundamentally for captives. They want to be able to subdue their enemies, and so you can use it as a flat subdual weapon. You can beat somebody literally into submission by using the weight on joints, shoulders, knees, vulnerable points to render a man senseless. You've then got your captive to sacrifice.
The Aztecs also use obsidian to make a wide range of dart and arrowheads. They are lightweight, hard, and incredibly sharp.
But these are worthless without a means of delivery. In this case, the Aztecs used one of the simplest and most primitive forms of delivery, and that's this, the atlatl, or dart thrower. It's basically just a long piece of wood. In this case, it's been selected from a branch for its curve, so it fits the hand, and then a slot and notch is cut in to take the dart. It's very simple physics. All the atlatl does is extend the length of your arm, and that doubles the force I impart to the dart.
Armed with the atlatl, an Eagle Warrior can down an enemy from up to 100 meters away.
If they strike in the throat or the heart if you're unarmored, then they're going to kill.
But the atlatl is not primarily designed to kill, but to disable.
The biggest effect is going to be to incapacitate and as a nuisance. In arms and legs, they're going to render the limbs useless. You can't run away, you can't fight back. You're injured, but you're not dead.
Eagle Warriors have one more use for obsidian. They fit it to the basic spear.
The Aztecs were using obsidian blades, razor-sharp edges, and a sharp thrusting point, but fixing it to a shaft to give them extra reach to get round the defensive weapons of their opponents and strike at vulnerable points. You can make lots of rapid, accurate strikes. You can strike at the throat, down into the groin, maybe even into armpits. And all the time, well within this safe area, beyond the reach of the enemy's weapons.
The obsidian-tipped spear is also the Eagle Snatch Squad's ideal tool for controlling their prisoners.
It's very useful for marshalling and herding captives. You can direct them to where you need them to be. And if you really need to, you can reverse the weapon and strike with the butt to subdue them and quell them.
Armed with their extensive range of weaponry, the Eagle Warriors have come to dominate Central America. But soon, they will face a foe the like of which they can't even imagine. It all begins with a series of strange events in the Aztec capital, Tenochtitlan. Montezuma is now in the 17th year of his reign. He presides over an empire that has never been bigger and never been stronger. But this all-powerful ruler is a deeply worried man.
The Aztecs were a culture that believed in omens, and there were 12 omens indicating that some kind of terrible catastrophe was going to happen.
Streaks of fire are seen shooting across the night sky. It is reported water in the lake surrounding the city has suddenly bubbled and boiled over. For no apparent reason, temples have suddenly caught fire and burnt to the ground.
It's hard to imagine what they would have made of this, other than being pretty terrified.
Then Montezuma receives disturbing reports from the very edge of his empire. A mysterious force of what are described as floating castles have been spotted approaching the east coast. Strange men come ashore. They have white complexions, wear bizarre outfits, and are armed with unknown powerful weapons. Hernán Cortés and his small band of conquistadors land on the mainland of America on Good Friday, 1519. They want to claim this land for their god and the King of Spain. They also plan to get very rich. But the Spanish are being tracked. Eagle Warriors watch their every move and dispatch urgent reports back to the capital.
So Montezuma is really anxious to find out who they are, to find out what they've got, what they want, and how he's going to deal with them.
The emperor assembles his full war council to work out a plan of action.
Montezuma would have been surrounded by his closest and most senior advisors.
Many of the senior councils were comprised of senior military figures, so Eagle Warriors would almost certainly have been part of those councils.
The War Council tries to make some sense of the astonishing drawings that have been made of the intruders. The Eagle Warriors' attention is drawn to sketches of a strange and powerful unknown weapon.
This kind of random killing thing, you can kill somebody a long way away and it makes a lot of noise and smoke, so there's sound, there's smoke, there's shock.
And it isn't just unknown weapons the Aztecs are faced with.
So we've got two animals they're not familiar with.
They would have been completely flabbergasted by these giant creatures, these horses.
These Spanish fighting dogs, these are terrible things.
They had never seen horses, they had never seen dogs trained to kill.
So there's a lot of shock. There's a lot of, technology, anxiety comes in here. What is all of this?
But Montezuma's younger brother, Quicklawak, isn't a man easily rattled. This senior military commander demands a swift, sharp campaign to annihilate the interlopers. He argues they may have strange new weapons, but they're small in number and no match for the Eagle Warriors. But the Aztec world is dominated by religion. As the ultimate theological leader, Montezuma is determined to find a spiritual explanation for the arrival of this strange force. And it's the Spanish helmet his spies have acquired that catches his attention. Some reports suggest he sees a resemblance to the headdress of the god Quetzalcoatl.
I think when Montezuma is processing this information, he's going to take a religious slant on this. You know, as far as he's concerned, this is a portent from heaven.
Other accounts claim Montezuma sees connections with Quetzalcoatl, a white-faced god who vanished across the sea to the east. Prophecies state, if Quetzalcoatl returns in Aztec Year 1 reed, he will strike at kings. It is now Year 1 reed, and it seems a white-faced leader has indeed appeared from the east.
Is it the return of one of the gods? Is Cortés one of the ancient Mexican gods? What is going on here? Why are these strange people landing on my coast? Where is this going to end?
Montezuma overrules Quicklawak and the warriors. He decides violence is the wrong strategy to keep this unknown force out of his capital. Ambassadors have suggested that there is one thing that these strangers value above all: gold. And so Montezuma makes the decision to buy them off.
Cortés was presented with beautiful gold presents.
It's the last thing Montezuma should have done.
They thought, well, this is interesting. We're onto a good thing here. We want more of this.
The Spanish just keep coming, heading straight for the Aztec capital.
The more Montezuma promises them, the more they understand must be there. If he can give us all of this, what else has he got?
That's how he ends up with Cortés on his doorstep.
After a 7-month, arduous march, Cortés and his band of conquistadors get their first sight of the Aztec capital, Tenochtitlan. They have never seen anything like it.
It's only when they get to Tenochtitlan they can see the sheer scale of what the Aztecs have.
The conquistadors were absolutely impressed with the beauty of the city of Tenochtitlan. A city surrounded by buildings built on a lake with overlooking volcanoes, covered with snow.
The awestruck Spaniards make their way across the causeway separating the capital from the mainland.
It is almost certainly the largest city any of them have ever seen, perhaps 250,000 people.
A city bigger and better than those of Seville and Granada.
Finally, Cortés gets to meet the man whose powerful and wealthy empire he plans to seize. Spanish accounts state there was now an exchange of gifts with Montezuma. Historians disagree over whether Montezuma receives Cortés as a god or as a respected ambassador of a mighty foreign empire. However, there is no doubting that the emperor now rolls out the red carpet for the conquistadors.
Montezuma was giving the best he could offer to Cortés and to his soldiers. He offered the palace of Axayacatl. The Spaniards were very welcomed by the Mexican king.
But whether by accident or design, Montezuma has placed the Spaniards in a location where they can be kept an eye on. They will be lodged close to the headquarters of the Eagle Warriors.
Where Cortés was staying, which was in a former ruler's palace, is very near to the Eagle precinct. In all likelihood, he would have been aware of the Eagle Warriors simply because they were some of the most prominent figures in society.
The Eagle Warriors are now eye to eye with the Spanish and leave them in no doubt as to what their job is in the Aztec Empire.
The Spaniards would have picked them out for soldiers, you know, from their dress, from the way they carried themselves. You know, this is their army. And just two rough street gangs eyeing each other up.
But the Eagle Warriors are mystified by the behavior of the Spanish soldiers in their midst. They appear more interested in grabbing gold than posing any real military threat. Furthermore, the Eagles have the conquistadors outnumbered and contained in their palace compound. What the Aztecs don't understand yet is just what sort of man they have let into their city.
There's no doubt that Cortés was a very clever, strategic thinking soldier. He realized that they were in a very difficult situation, but he also realized that there were enormous riches and rewards to be had by staying put.
There is now a period of uneasy peace between the Eagle Warriors and the Spaniards. But it was never likely to last, and is shattered when Cortés receives an urgent dispatch from the coast. 7 of the conquistadors' comrades in arms have been attacked and killed, and they have died the Aztec way. The Spaniards were taken captive, bound, and forced up to the altar. Once there, their hearts were ripped out. The conquistadors are appalled at the news. It's a timely reminder of their likely fate if the Eagle Warriors go on the offensive. But for now, the Spanish are hell-bent on revenge.
You can kill, but you don't sacrifice. You know, killing, but not murder. What the Aztecs are doing is murder. It's the deliberate killing of helpless prisoners.
But the canny Cortés channels his men's anger in a clever way. He leads an armed deputation to the royal palace. He wants to seize himself a hostage, and not just any hostage.
One of the masterstrokes that he had was to carry out the kidnapping of Montezuma. You know, Cortés was very clever because he was saying, you know, it's not me that wants to keep you here. I would let you go back today if I could, but it's all my captains that they are crying for your blood. I'm really looking after your best interests.
It's unclear why Montezuma finally does give in to the threats of Cortés. But comply he does, and the mighty emperor allows himself to be marched off and placed under effective house arrest.
In order to use Montezuma effectively as a puppet ruler, though, there has to be a degree of consent. And whether that's obtained through fear or through a need for cooperation is hard to tell.
Whichever the case, the kidnapping of Montezuma opens up an unprecedented crisis for the intensely hierarchical Aztec Empire. any likely response can only come from senior military commanders and leading Eagle Warriors.
It's possible, of course, that there was actually quite a lot of dissent amongst people like the warrior leaders. You can't imagine these great, brave, military figures standing round and allowing the Spanish to obviously dominate.
No doubt there was debate behind the scenes as to how to deal with this.
The obvious rallying point for the dissenting warriors is Montezuma's brother, Quicklawak, the man who has opposed the Spanish from day one. But in the Aztec Empire, there is no precedent for going against the wishes of an emperor.
He was a commander of the army, he was the highest ranking individual in the state, he was a demigod, and so if he said he was happy to go along with it, which apparently he did, there wasn't very much anyone else could do.
To add insult to injury, Cortés now demands the keys to the Tutocali, the empire's vast treasure house. This is what the Spanish have crossed the seas and risked their necks for. Jewelry, precious stones, and gold. Huge amounts of gold. With Montezuma's consent, Cortés now controls the city and effectively nullifies the Eagle Warriors. But then his delicate diplomatic balancing act, suddenly all comes crashing down. Cortés returns from a mission to the coast to find Tenochtitlan in open revolt.
He comes back to the city and is very unhappy to find his troops besieged and starving in the palace where they'd been staying.
Cortés had left the city in a state of uneasy peace, but now returns to bloody mayhem.
Alvarado, who he'd left in charge, is a rather blunt instrument, to put it mildly, and he obviously has instigated an outright battle where Cortés hadn't wanted one.
Alvarado has led a massacre of up to 1,000 high-ranking Aztecs, including senior Eagle Warriors, at a religious festival in the main temple.
In the middle of this festival, he decided to attack and massacre the participants, which caused huge consternation and disquiet in the city, as you can imagine.
It's the final straw for the military commanders and embittered Eagle Warriors. Finally, they decide this is the time to fight back.
High-ranking individuals have decided that Montezuma is a lost cause.
His authority is being undercut, his role as a representative of the gods is being undercut.
Well, they decided that they would just give up on him.
They replace him even though he's still alive, and that's almost unheard of.
For the Eagle Warriors, there is only one contender for the top job, the hero of countless wars, Quicklawak. Quicklawak instantly presses his Eagle Warriors into service. And they have the Spanish just where they want them, holed up and surrounded in their palace, located in the center of the city.
The Spanish are trapped in the palace. They're running out of all the things they need.
I don't think we can have any doubt that the Spanish are absolutely in fear of their lives. Part of that was the realization that they were up against a very slick fighting machine.
Hopelessly outnumbered, Cortés begs Montezuma to appeal to his subjects to let the Spanish leave the city. But the hapless emperor is jeered and pelted with rocks. Montezuma is mortally wounded. Cortés now has a grim choice to make. He must either fight against the overwhelming odds or surrender with the inevitable consequences.
They slept with their armor on, they slept with their horses saddled and bridled, ready to escape. They knew that they were in a very perilous situation.
Quicklawak now summons his top warriors to a secret briefing. He reveals his strategy for annihilating the invaders. They will starve the conquistadors out into the open, where they will have to stand and fight. If they choose to make a run for it, the warriors will be ready.
Part of their strategy is to make the exit from the city as complicated and as difficult as they can.
The city is surrounded by a wide lake. The only way out is across one of the 5 causeways connecting Tenochtitlan with the mainland. The Spanish are besieged in their palace, just off the central temple precinct. The most direct way out of the city is to head west for the Tacuba Causeway and use it to retreat to the mainland. But Quicklawak has a surefire way of cutting off the escape route and ensnaring them in the city.
They remove a lot of the bridges that allowed people to cross over the causeways and the canals.
They would have worked out that this was going to be a very dangerous place to get trapped in.
And if the Spanish do manage to make it as far as the breached causeway, the Eagle Warriors will be ready to go in for the kill.
That's when they see it's their moment to pick off the retreating troops.
It's a lot easier to kill people if you're knocking them into the water.
It's an obvious place for an ambush.
The situation is becoming increasingly desperate in the Spanish compound. Cortés mounts the walls to scout a potential escape route out of the city. But what he sees shocks him.
Cortés can see already the bridges have been destroyed or rendered useless.
Even worse, by now the conquistadors are almost out of water, food, and gunpowder. Their options are stark. Break out and face a quick end at the hands of the Eagle Warriors, or stay put and slowly starve to death.
They decide that they're just going to have to break out.
Cortés may be trapped, but this Spaniard is not going down without a fight. He orders his men to rip down the wooden beams from the roof of the palace. They lash the spars together. They hope this makeshift bridge will span the gaps in the causeway. The conquistadors are almost ready to break out, but first, they have one final all-important job.
It tells us a lot about them that before they break out, they divide up the gold and every man has his share.
And a lot of the soldiers loaded themselves up with this gold. I mean, why wouldn't they? It was too good an opportunity to miss.
Midnight. The Spanish pull out. Unimpeded, they make their way stealthily through the city and head due west towards the Tacuba Causeway.
They start to escape at night. This is a city with very regular, very straight streets. It wouldn't be terribly difficult to find your way to the causeway from the central precinct.
It all seems to be going well for the Spanish. They reach the lakeside, and then...
The Mexicans were ready to kill as many Spaniards as they could.
The Eagle Warriors soon put the portable bridge out of action. Now they have the Spanish trapped all along the causeway.
They're, of course, at an incredible tactical disadvantage, being attacked from all sides while they're trying to escape across these narrow causeways.
The Eagle Warriors are seasoned, they are skillful, they have terrible weapons that inflict terrible damage.
However good your armour is, it will only take you so far against incredible weight of numbers.
Despite their sophisticated weaponry, the Spanish are now cut off by the Eagle Warriors.
The Spanish had to wade through and jump over these gaps, these canals, where the bridges had been taken away.
And then it descended into chaos.
People trampling over other people to try and cross the gaps in the causeways.
The Spanish now pay a high price for their lust for gold.
They're running for their lives, and they're carrying a large weight of gold with them. So either they're unbelievably brave or unbelievably stupid.
And a lot of them actually came to grief because the weight of the gold in their clothes just dragged them to the bottom of the water and they drowned.
Cortés and a few of his men escape, but many stragglers are rounded up, bound and bundled away by the Eagle Warriors. They know exactly what to do with their captives.
Spaniards didn't surrender. They were stunned and captured and dragged away.
The proud Eagle Warriors have suffered months of humiliation at the hands of the Spanish invaders. Now it is time for their revenge. The Spanish who have made it to the safety of the mainland can do nothing but look back at the city in horror.
The sight of the sacrifices on the pyramids, the sound of their own companions being butchered up there.
The Eagle Warriors have wiped out most of the army of Cortés and retrieved the bulk of the looted treasure. Legend has it that as he looks back over the killing ground, Cortés weeps. The Spanish call it La Noche Triste, the night of tears. But for the Eagle Warriors, this is their finest hour. Within a year, Cortés raises a new army and once again marches on Tenochtitlan. After months of fierce street fighting, the Spanish finally take the shattered city. The Eagle Warriors are not defeated by cold Spanish steel, but by virulent European diseases. Thousands of Eagle Warriors and millions of Aztecs succumb to smallpox and are wiped out. History often dismisses the Aztec warriors as hopelessly ineffectual when faced by the conquistadors. However, it is clear that on La Noche Triste, the Eagle Warriors routed the Spanish, then the most powerful nation in Europe.
During the period of the Spanish conquest, this is certainly their largest military victory.
I don't think there's any doubt that the expulsion of the Spanish from the city following the events of the Noche Triste was a major victory for the Aztecs.
The Noche Triste was I think, a tactical victory for the Aztecs. They defeated the Spaniards, but the Spaniards got away. If they'd killed them all, it might have been different.
Today, the Mexican capital stands on the ruins of one of the most fabulous cities ever constructed, and on the bones of one of the most powerful fighting forces ever raised, the Aztec Eagle Warriors.